Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is my philosophy channel, and I just released a new book, and I'm going to do a series starting with this video on subjects that pertain to areas that could make a person have difficulty understanding something in my concepts. So we're going to deal with kind of hang-ups that people could easily encounter in studying my ideas. Yeah. Now the first one, is on words. I'm going to give a discussion of words in general and some in particular. Okay. And it's all important. And as I said, this is the beginning of a short series of such videos that will be numbered. Now, first of all, in philosophy, the medium of the art is words. Just like if in painting it's paint, and music it's notes and rhythm, in philosophy, it's words. And there are other fields that deal in words, like, for instance, poetry. But poetry comes at words and deals with words in a very different way. The poet capitalizes on the ambiguity of the meaning of words very often, and uses those to his advantage. But in philosophy, the emphasis is on the exactness of the meaning of words that are used when discussing a subject. And this exactness brings up special problems and that philosophers have to deal with, and I'm going to talk about that because most people aren't that familiar with that. Even if they're in the sciences work. All of the sciences work within a paradigm where the meaning of words is established in the context of that particular school of science or approach or paradigm. That model of the world has words that it is described in, and those words do have exact meaning, but they're predetermined. In philosophy, we sometimes come to trying to articulate something that is not established in some closed school where everybody knows the meaning. There may not even be a specialized word, and therefore he has to be very careful in either creating a new word and defining it very carefully, or choosing another word and then defining it in his own specialized way. Okay, now I'm going to start this with a little joke. I used to be in my younger days. I was in filmmaking, and there was a joke there's a joke in the film industry that there's a writer, and he's written a script and he's submitted it to a studio, and the head of the studio meets with him and he says, "Oh, we are very, very excited about this script. We love every word. Don't change the word. It's so perfect. We only have one suggestion, just one change we'd like you to make, and that is we'd like you to change the main character into a dog." So I hope that a person watching this can understand the problem with changing the main character in a script from a person to a dog. That's not one small change. And the producer and the studio couldn't possibly have actually liked the story because they've completely changed it from bottom up. So that's funny. That's where you have. Anyway, I thought that was funny. All right. Now, I brought that up because it'll make more sense later. I'll get back to it. People are often saying, "I don't think you should use this word in your book or in your writing. I think you should use this word. And then it turns out that's like changing the person into a dog. Well, you don't get the idea, you don't like the idea, that's all. We're not working on the idea anymore. Yeah, I'm just trying to communicate it to you. And you're trying to give me a whole new idea, probably something that you already think, because that's mostly what most people want what they already have. Now, I think that segues to the next point I want to make. This may seem kind of I'm rambling, but it's not. It's all on the subject of words. But I'm talking about some peeves I have first. So there is a thing that I encounter a lot. It's kind of like from the dog story in the script, where you explain to somebody that you have a new idea, and then the person hears the new idea. They're excited to hear a new idea, and then when you get done with the new idea, they go, well, that doesn't feel right. That's not what I already thought. I don't think people are going to agree with you. That's not what people think. So people have a very hard time getting, I would have to say, like, what part of new don't you understand? So on Amazon, the description of my book goes, Chris Ott returns to an old theme, explaining the creation of the universe in a whole new way. And skipping a little, I would get down here, and it says, the reader is led on a journey as he re-examines and questions his most basic assumptions of reality. Okay? And yet, when people hear the idea or begin to read the idea, very often they're very disturbed that it's not what they think. And they begin to, they raise their hand to give a lecture on how it is, which is basically how everybody thinks it is. Okay? There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding that the philosopher is just confused about what the rest of us think. And so he's just lost. But actually the philosopher is addressing the way people think and describing it better than they can, and then showing a new way of looking at it. But this is so frustrating because I had this book signing, and I've been through this so many times. My daughter says, Dad, this isn't at all surprising. You should have expected this. It's just that it was sad because you were excited that you were going to have a book signing. But I had this book signing, and instead of questions at the end, I was going to have a question and answer. People raised their hand to give a lecture, to tell me how it is, or tell them some doctrine and that this is a heresy, because of what somebody says. It's like, kind of like, well, there's a word for this in philosophy where Heraclitus, who was a philosopher 2,600 years ago, said, all dogs bark at strangers. And what he meant is people just get upset at new ideas, and that's just how people are. So, and they're not really aware of it. They want to have new ideas, but it's just unsettling for them. And I don't think people realize how unsettling new ideas really are. People have been burned at the stake for new ideas, and people have been had their careers destroyed, and et cetera, because and whole societies have had to change their whole outlook, and sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better, because of new ideas. My introduction to philosophy was called The Power of Ideas, and it pointed out that all revolutions have an idea. That's essentially what's driving them, is some new idea. It's not just, lack of, food, that drives a revolution. It's also, there's got to be some kind of new idea how we're going to get food, okay? Or whether food is, the most important value in the world, or what. And so, capitalism, communism, and even Christianity, these are all new ideas at some time in history. Okay, so that's enough on that. Now, I'll come back to that. Okay. Now, a lot of people, when they want to lecture you about what a word means, they of course refer to the dictionary. And they say, see what it says in the dictionary? Now, I want to say something about words and dictionaries, because people are very naive about all this. Shakespeare lived before there was any English dictionary in the world. There were lists of translations from Latin to English, but there was no English dictionary. So he lived in that world. And he lived between 1564 and 1616, and the first really useful English dictionary was written 50 years after his death. Now, in Shakespeare's lifetime, in his body of work, he invented more than 2,000 new words, okay? New words are called neologisms. Neo meaning new, and logos meaning word. So, 2,000 words. Now, how could he create 2,000 words? Is that legal? Well, there actually is no legality or government that enforces the use of the meaning of words. You use the words that convey what you're trying to convey. And if you use odd words and they do a better job than some other words, then go ahead and use them, and maybe other people will imitate you. But there are no word definition laws, and there's no dictionaries like the Oxford Unabridged Dictionary of English was put together, by the way, over a period of 50 years, where you could subscribe and you would get annual updates of new words that have been added, and it wasn't completed until 1928, and it's 20 volumes long. Now, the way those lexicographers put together the Oxford Unabridged Dictionary was they went through sources, through books going way back in history for as long as there was English, which isn't really that long. English isn't an old language. And in the writing, they would see the use of a word, and then they would refer to these different meanings in these different, as they were used differently. And the meaning of words changes over time. Okay, so you'll have a very long definition of a word in Oxford, in the unabridged, the unabridged Oxford Dictionary, they're giving it every sense it has ever been given in some kind of credit by some credible author, or some respected use of the term. You see the evolution of that right there in Oxford. So the lexicographers, the writers didn't use the words because the Oxford Dictionary defined it that way. It's the other way around. The Oxford Dictionary defined the words the way the authors were using them. So dictionaries follow usage. Now, of course, in daily life, a lot of times our usage in most contexts can follow the dictionary meaning, because that's a very if you didn't learn all the words there are, and there's a lot more words than there used to be, there's an awful lot of words, you might use a dictionary. But just going to Webster's that you've got on your computer, that's really not looking at all, because that's an abbreviated dictionary, and that's giving the most recent colloquial meaning, for the most part, with few exceptions. Now there's, we won't even get into etymology. Etymology is the study of where words came from into English, and that often will shed some light on its meaning, because you'll see how it was originally used by extension from some other word in another language. But that's not how you prove what a word means either. You don't go, see, here's the etymology. That's what it means. Words are not defined by authority. And as I said, in philosophy, when you're dealing with new ideas, it is almost always you are going to encounter the need to either create new neologisms, new original words, if you have new original concepts, or define words that have been used in various ways in the past and then specify your sort of proprietary use of that word in your work. So in the context, say, sometimes a word will have a meaning strictly in a particular book. Okay, in this book, this word means such and such. Now, if you specify that, you have broken no rules of any kind. You're following the rule of defining your words. And in philosophy, especially in analytic philosophy, which is the type we have in English, that's most common, we are very careful not to be true to the dictionary, but very careful that we specify how we're using our words and that we're not being like a poet, because all kinds of logical fallacies can be created by using a word in two ways in the same sentence or the same paragraph or something like that, which is something that a poet could do to great effect, but would be disastrous for a philosopher who's trying to be specific about what he means when he's talking about something, especially when he's talking about something that's novel and new. Okay, now now the bane of the last 20 years of my working on the concept that's in my book, Evolution of Perception, my two books, The Evolution of Perception and The Cosmology of Substance, in 2004, and then my 2021 book, Evolution of Perception Re-Explained. The bane of those years has been the confusion that people have who are not philosophers with the word perception, or who maybe have a tiny bit of education in philosophy, but very, very not enough to understand how words are used technically in a field, and tend to have the kinds of habits that people have where they look in the dictionary quickly and they go, oh, you're using the word wrong. Okay, so the word was always perception, and you can see how important that is, because all my writing is about perception. Okay, that's the theme of my work. And literally it goes back 20 years, because even in my first book, I had spent about several years working on it. So it wasn't like that's when I had the idea. I've had it years before that. And I had that while I was in a university setting, my original ideas, and I was able to discuss my use of words. And I did with about a dozen PhDs in several fields, including some very well-known ones, like Lothar Schaefer, a physical chemist who's with some celebrity, and we spent hours talking about this idea and words that express what we're talking about. And there's a kind of let me give some of the examples of where people have gotten tripped up by this word perception, and then we go into the real history of the word perception, which understandably people don't know, actually. But in my books, especially my newest, I think it's well explained. But I want to add more to it here, because it's very important to me. And it came up in my book signing, and it was so disturbing to me that I just cut out the question and answer section in that video that's online, because that would be useless, and it would be insulting to the people that were there. So when I wrote my first book 17 years ago, it came out 17, my mother got hold of it, And my mother actually had a degree in philosophy when she was, young, like in 1946, a bachelor's. But she had been working on getting her bachelor's in architecture, but then she found out she had taken so many philosophy classes, it was easier to just get the degree in philosophy. So it wasn't really like she was interested. She found the classes kind of easy, and so she took them. But I've talked to her about philosophy, and she doesn't know anything about it. She doesn't even remember the meaning of the major words that are used in philosophy, like epistemology or ontology. She doesn't know what they mean. And she had to write a bachelor's thesis to get her bachelor's degree in philosophy. And she told me about it, and then I saw it, and she didn't even know the name of it because she had forgotten, and she didn't know what the words meant. And she's not a good philosopher. Anyway, she didn't read my book. She found the first page apparently too difficult, and she said, "Oh, so you've written a book about eyesight?" And I said, "No, it's not about eyesight. It's about perception." She said, "Well, perception means eyesight. That's what it means." So I don't know what else to say. That was sort of like the end of talking about anything philosophical. That was totally the end. I mean, that's ridiculous. Now, the sad thing is if you just use the fastest dictionary you can. No, it doesn't even mean that there. I'm looking in the dictionary that comes with this computer. No, it doesn't mean the eyesight. However, the word perception, which should be consistent with the word perceive, and it's not in dictionaries, and there's a reason for that. A big confusion happened right around the year 1800, which caused the whole meaning of perception and perceive to get lost and confused. So the word perception in the Apple dictionary here, which is based, by the way, on Oxford's abbreviated one, it says the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something with your sense through the senses. So it means physical, perception of physical objects. It does say that. So that's what she was quoting. So, but in philosophy, it generally doesn't mean that. That's what it means in neuroscience, but it doesn't mean that in philosophy, because philosophy has a different tradition, and it goes back to the use of the word as it was used in the originally in English, when it was very heavily used, was in the Enlightenment by Hume and Locke and Berkeley and Kant and stuff. So, and so philosophers understand what I'm going to explain to you, not the history of the story, but they do understand the general usage, which is much more generalized, the word perception, which I'll explain in a moment. That was one. And then I had a friend who was a graduate student and a terrible drug addict who wouldn't get into a program, but he was very cocky, and he said the same thing as my mother. So this is very common. People think that the word perception just means sense perception. You have to be perceiving, like I can have sense perception of this, but I can't perceive, my dream. I can't perceive a memory, or I can't perceive that you are drunk, because that's not sense. It has to be with your eyes and ears, and it has to be outside your head, and it has to be physical. But that's just, I'll show why that's not the case. Okay, and then when I was giving the talk, well, that's more complicated. I'm going to wait on that. But it's really complicated. I'm going to just cover this story about what happened with the word perception and why today a dictionary will tell you it means, it'll talk about seeing external things, whatever that means, like outside your head, I guess. Like, this is outside my head, so I perceive it. So, and with my eyes, or I hear it with my ears, or some, these orbs these holes on the outside of my head. But originally, this is the history of the word. the verb percipere, I can't remember. The word to perceive in the Latin meant to gather or take, okay? And so you could use that to perceive the rents on your the rentals that you're renting out, or a farmer could perceive his crops. He gathers or collects his crops. He takes his crops out of the ground and collects them. And that's what it meant. And it was also used in law and stuff. And that it always meant to collect or to take. And well, so in time, it came to be used, it came through the French into English, from Latin to French to English. It came to be used by extension to take experience of, okay, or to take awareness of something, to take cognizance of something, okay, or to take knowledge, so gather knowledge, okay, and so, but it meant that had no rule about being of physical things or external things. It could be, I could sit and I could consider, songs in my head, and I could gather, what songs I knew, or I could try to, that's still perceiving the sound in my head, okay? So it didn't have to be through my eyes, it could be through my mind. And the very first dictionaries actually said that the word essentially meant the same as conscious, to be conscious. But you notice conscious is not a verb. So you can't conscious something, I'm gonna, let's see, did I leave the stove on? Let me conscious that a minute. No, rather I would say, let me, I see in my mind that I turned on I see my memory that I turned the stove off, okay? So we can't use the word conscious. So while it meant essentially the same thing, because you can be conscious of anything. You can be conscious of a pain inside or a thought, or, you're conscious of your dreams when you're dreaming, stuff like that. That's what perceive meant, and that's how they used it. All philosophers used the word that way. And but what happened is there was a philosopher named David Hume in Scotland at the end of the 1700s, or in the 1700s. And he questioned all kinds of assumptions that philosophers had always had about all kinds of things. Is there really a self? And can we see causation, or do we just really see correlation? And he had all these problems. He was kind of like making philosophers really think about things that they had just assumed. And this made a lot of his countrymen very upset, because it felt to them like, well, all his arguments are great, but that's just so irritating, that's just stupid, how can we stop him? So they came up with a kind of philosophy in Scotland at this time in the 1700s called common sense philosophy. And the most famous common sense philosopher was Thomas Reid, and an American philosopher named Edward Reid, 20th century, has said that Thomas Reid wished to use common sense not really to gain philosophical wisdom, as much as to simply, he wanted to use common sense to attack any form of intellectual change. Do you follow? So Hume was disrupting the presumptions of philosophers for all time, going all the way back. And it was a very revolutionary. but it irritated philosophers that didn't want to have to change their thinking. So they came up with the idea that their thinking was common sense, which is actually just saying unconsidered. Okay? So they had unconsidered philosophy. In fact, they were basically pissed off at David Hume for questioning things they had always presumed without examination. And so they Reid defined perception in what he thought was common sense, that the only things you can perceive are things outside of you with your eyes or your ears or your sense organs, okay? Because that's common sense. And he called that perception proper. And any other use of the word perception, that was sort of perception in some kind of woo-woo way. And then, amazingly, after him, a baronet, Sir William Hamilton, 9th Baronet of Preston, who was an apologist for Reid. He got very influential with the development of the early dictionaries, and he told them that Reid was sort of an authority on how to on perception and the meaning of the word, and they believed him because they weren't philosophers; they were lexicographers, and so they made the proper use, essentially, this with the senses only of external objects. But that's a complete violation of lexicography because they weren't defining the word as it's used, because at that very time it was being used different ways at the same time as Reid. Matter of fact, it was his point of saying perception proper and all this common sense was to block this thinking. Okay, and so by restricting the meaning of the word perception, on the advice of Sir William Hamilton, it is as if an entire concept was simply removed from our English vocabulary. Now, there's a really big problem with this, and I have to emphasize what that is. First of all, I can't even talk about perceiving say a spiritual vision, okay, or even physical things. There's a thing called Schizolating Scotoma. I've had it before. It's supposed to be associated with migraine headaches. Mostly men have it, and what happens is there's some kind of swelling in the brain, and it causes you to see what looks like shiny broken glass with sort of backlit, and it's shimmering and moving, and it goes on for about 15 minutes or so, and because it's in the middle of your vision, you can't see, you can't drive, you're disabled, and you don't know it's going to stop. I didn't know what it was the first time it happened. I was reading a book, and suddenly I couldn't see the book, and I saw these weird, like broken glass, these little geometries. Now, did I perceive them? 100%. Were they external? No, they were in my brain. Now I knew at the time, but I thought I had had a stroke. I knew it was internal because in my brain, because I covered one eye and it was there, and I could cover the other eye and it was right there, and I could look around and it was always in front of me. So I knew it was internal, not external. But that would not be. I did not perceive that. So we have an epistemological problem. Epistemology means how do you know something? So we have a problem of how we know something. How do I know I had scotoma? What made me think that I was seeing this thing? I couldn't have perceived it. So how did I acquire that knowledge? How did I gather the information that I was experiencing a schizolating scotoma? How did that happen? I didn't perceive it. I don't know. It's just amazing. So here's a story. This is an early version of my book, but I took it out because my book was getting too long. I took an enormous amount out of my book. Hopefully all that I've preserved, but I don't know. It's pretty mangled, but in so many versions and everything. But imagine that a man wakes up and he turns to his wife and he says, "Oh, I had this really strange dream, and the dream was, of this ship was sinking, and it had these green sails, and it was going down, and the people on the ship were crying out, and this and that." And she says, because she's a philosophy student, and she's really kind of irritating, and she's kind of thinking of getting a divorce. So she says, "How do you know you had that dream?" And he says, "Well, I just know, I remember it." "Well, how do you know you remember it?" And it's like, he said, "Well, I have my memory of things." "How do you know you have the memory?" "Well, I mean, you can't say, "Well, I remember remembering." I know you would say, "Well, I perceive. I stop and I close my eyes and I reflect or introspect, and then I see my memory of the dream, and I assume it's a true, memory of a dream that I had because I had it immediately on waking up. I still had that memory, and I'm sort of remembering the dream, and so I perceive my memory of perceiving the ship in the dream. That's how I know. But since we've removed the concept of perceiving anything except external objects from our vocabulary, I can't even give a justification for why I think that I did. Or the husband and wife are leaving the house, and she says, "Did you turn off the stove?" And he says, "Yes." "How do you know?" He says, "Well, I perceived my memory that I turned it off. I can Matilda, that's impossible, because you can't perceive a memory because it's not a physical external object." So it's all ridiculous. And 99% of what we know based on our memory. No, much more than 99%, almost all. So we have no reason to think that we know and have any of our memories because we can't perceive them, which is not true. We do perceive them. Okay, now I have to bring up a deeper subject, and this pertains to the thing that begins to pertain to the confusion that came up during my book signing the other day. And that is, in my book, and in my earlier book, I think I even did a better job of explaining it in my first book. I put forward the idea, and it's the part that's new. Okay, so when it's a new idea, and you hear the idea, well, that's not what I already thought when I came here. This is not acceptable. I disagree. Because you see, that's where I say people don't know what. I go, well, what part of new do you not understand? It's new. So no, you didn't, but think about it. And I'll explain it. Ask some questions. But no, it's like Thomas Reid. That's not common sense. Remember, he came up with common sense in order to stop any change in thought. Simply wanted to use common sense to attack any form of intellectual change. That's Edward S. Reid on Thomas Reid's use of the term common sense in attacking new ideas. And Thomas Reid was very influential in the 20th century, by the way, 20th century philosophy. More so than almost anybody from the Enlightenment. They even referred to our current paradigm as common sense metaphysics, because it's presumption based. You just presume it. That's what we think. See, we don't think about that. It's like sort of non-thinking philosophy. So anyway, I proposed in that book the idea that in the beginning, before there was anything, there was perception, but there wasn't anybody doing the perceiving, and there wasn't anything to perceive. Now that seems really upsetting, because generally what we think we mean by perception includes that it has to be by something and of something. Or otherwise, I mean, like, who's doing the perceiving and what's he perceiving? If he's not perceiving something, he's not perceiving. And all that is presumed. And somebody objected on that basis at my talk. But let me just say one thing before I go on with my own arguments why that's not true. There's a whole school of Eastern thought called Advaita Vedanta. And Advaita Vedanta does accept the idea of thoughts without a thinker, or there's the idea of objectless awareness and even subjectless awareness. Okay, so none of this is new. It's like 900 years old. And also, David Hume questioned the idea of that there is a self doing his witnessing. Okay, and that was in Scotland in the 1700s. So it's just that people are not exposed to it, of course, because that's not their area. I mean, this person, his area was something else. All right. Now let me go into, but that's not, I don't argue from some school of Advaita Vedanta, and I don't argue from the arguments of Hume or anything like that. I simply propose it as a hypothesis that there was perception before there was a subject or object. Okay, so before there was a subject doing it, before there was anything to perceive. And so I'm going to give some ways to conceptualize this that'll help. Okay, consider a baby shortly before it's born in its mother's womb. And it has all the faculties of perception, both external ears and everything, and also a brain that has the capacity to, say, hold memories or to imagine or to, or to even to develop concepts. It has those abilities. It's going to need those as soon as it's born, right away on the very first day. But right now, they're not even latent. They're active. Okay, but they don't have anything to act upon. Okay, because there's nothing really happening in there for it to perceive, but it is perceiving. I mean, even when you close your eyes, you're perceiving. It's just that it shields anything for you to see except the inside of your eyelids, and that's in the dark. But you are still perceiving. You don't stop perceiving when you close your eyes. Now, in the womb, this embryo, this baby, is perceiving. Now, some would say, yeah, but it's perceiving like it's mother's heartbeat. Say it's in the night and there's no other sounds. But let's say that the mother's heart becomes so quiet that the baby doesn't hear that, or even the mother's heart stops for a few seconds. And during that time, there is no object to its perceiving at all. Does it stop perceiving? No, it's still perceiving. It's still perceiving. It's in a sense, its faculties are still open to receive the whole time, and so it's actively an active receptacle. Is that the right word? Let's give another analogy. Let's say I have a microphone. Here, I'll get a microphone. And let's say this is a radio mic, so it doesn't need a cord. Say I turn it on here, and now it is picking up any sound. Now, even if we were completely dead silent and we were in an isolation chamber, it's still picking up any possible sound. It's still listening, okay? It's still, I hate to say this but it's in the analogy, it's still perceiving, even though there's nothing to perceive, okay? It's still listening. You could sort of say, like, in the beginning, and I even say this in my first book, it's as if, it's kind of like, think of the kind of perception you have when you're just sort of staring off, but there's nothing to see, like looking off into an abyss or into a void. there's nothing there, but you're still looking. You're looking for. You're anticipating, not actively anticipating, but you're receptive. Okay? If something comes along, you're going to sense it because you are perceiving. You don't. Okay? That I hope helps. For me, I don't have a problem with it. I don't know. I was just born like this. My father was a painter. I was a filmmaker. My father was a painter who was going blind, and we were always worrying he was going to go blind because that was how he made his bread and butter. So perception was always on our mind. You know, when I was 4 years old, my mother says, we'd go through a door, and most 4-year-olds would just jump on through the door with the family, but I would turn and make sure my dad didn't hit his head if the door was high enough. Because I was aware of how he had tunnel vision. Tunnel vision means you can only see like this, and so he could easily bump his head into things. And I was aware of that. So I had an awareness of other people's awareness when I was, I was born like that. You could call it empathy. So, and then the idea of perceiving without a subject, somebody doing this thing, I even have an easier time with that. We're talking about the action. We're not talking about the having to have something doing it. That's how we find perception in the world. But I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about something before the world. Now, another argument another person could give, which I've anticipated, is they could go, yeah, but in English, it's proper to have whenever you have a verb, you got to have a subject and an object. You can't just throw. You have to have, Johnny threw the football. Johnny is the subject, football is the object. But throwing, what's that without the football and without Johnny? That's grammar. But grammar also is something you're finding in the world. Now you're trying to read it into the causational state before the world. And that's actually a fallacy that's in my book called The Historical Fallacy. It's kind of like a logical anachronism. You're putting something before it could possibly exist. So your rules of grammar are terrific, but they don't apply to metaphysics. We're talking about metaphysics. We're not talking about, that's jolly good that we have those rules to teach, English students. But we came up with those after we had English. We didn't come up with them before. Now there's still one more issue here, because the guy raised his hand the other day. He said, "What you mean is consciousness. That's what you mean, consciousness." Now, I didn't mean consciousness, and there's a long story about that. Which, of course, you couldn't be a philosopher if you had to tell every long story about every, month of agonizing thought you went through and talking to, experts in order to get one idea and the next idea. But no, I didn't mean consciousness. As a matter of fact, I originally had the word consciousness, and it says that in my book, in an appendix where I talk about things that changed from my earlier writing into the newer writing. But when I say newer writing, I mean writing as of like 20 years ago. Before that, before about 2001, so that's 20 years ago, I wrote a paper in 1999 called The Consciocentric Universe, and my word was consciousness. And I didn't yet have the idea of an evolution of consciousness, but if I had, that would have come straight out of Meher Baba's books. But it would have been a misunderstanding of his word, evolution of consciousness, if I had used it the way I use the word evolution of perception. I'll explain that in a minute too. Well, anyway, so I wrote this paper and I showed it to maybe a dozen academics, PhDs. Various fields, including physics and physical chemistry, and even a professor of music, professor of mathematics, several professors of philosophy. And I got a lot of feedback, and none of them really liked that word consciousness. And then I talked to one professor, PhD, who was retiring, named Sandra Edwards, who really liked me, and she was really sweet. What a wonderful lady. But Sandra Edwards read my paper, and then I went to pick it up, and she said, "I like it, it makes sense. The only thing is, where you use the word consciousness, you mean perception. She said, most philosophers understand the word consciousness to mean self-awareness, okay? Or, you're aware that you're aware. And that's not what she said, that's not what you mean. You mean perception. And she actually taught, modern philosophy from the Enlightenment. So that's when they did use the word perception that way. And I took her class, and so we were talking the same language, and I understood what she meant. And I made that change at that point. And, you can tell people that, and they go, yeah, well, I disagree. Well, really? You have no back. You've thought about this for 38 minutes, and that's it, But also, the person was thinking he was said that I was committing a heresy in Meher Baba understanding. Now, I'm a philosopher. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a Meher Baba apologist. I get lots of ideas from Meher Baba, but I get lots of ideas from Immanuel Kant and Berkeley and Norwood Hansen and all kinds of people, and they're essential, those things, and Gestalt psychology. I cannot be, faced with doctrine, but there's misunderstanding of the doctrine. So he said, well, he thinks that my book is called Evolution of Perception, and Meher Baba, who's wonderful and all, but he's very misunderstood. He has a chapter in his main book called The Evolution of Consciousness, but it means something different, the word evolution. My book means the changing of perception over time to create the world. What Meher Baba is referring to is the emergence of self-awareness. Like the philosophers use the word consciousness to mean self-awareness. That's what Meher Baba means by evolution. See, evolution can mean different things. So you could say, so he means how we got consciousness out of the creation process. It doesn't, the evolution of consciousness isn't creating the evolutionary process, it's a byproduct of it. And he says that right in the book, and he calls it a byproduct. And he said the universe, the formation of the universe is a consciousness factory. That's what Meher Baba says in God Speaks. It's right there. Anybody can go look it up. That's not what I'm talking about. He's talking about how did we get self-awareness and why. That's the meaning of the longest chapter in the book, is the evolution of consciousness. That means the arising of consciousness. Okay? So anybody who thinks that my word should be consciousness should already be questioning his assumptions. Now there's another thing about this that's very important. There's something that we've all got exposed to, less than most people. It's the New Age movement, New Age thinking. Now a lot of people wouldn't call it anything bad. They might call it, theosophy or something like that. Steiner or something, and they would feel very reverent of it, okay? And in all that writing, you see the two words all the time, energy and consciousness. And these mean something that I do not mean, and I say it in my book. I do not mean consciousness the way they mean it in the New Age movement, which I don't even know what it is. It's something. It's like a field of, it's like a stuff or something. And then energy, I don't even have that, okay? I don't know what that is. I ascribe to a different point of view, which I have to go into at some point. I need to talk about energy and quantum mechanics too, in terms of my book, because I didn't go into it in my book. It would have taken too long. And I'm not an expert, but I'm just going to show in general in a later talk in this series how I deal with those. But I don't deal with them with words poorly defined like energy or energy field, and all these words stolen from science like energy field. Also, there's a lot of other words too they use, like dimensions, dimensions here, dimensions there. But consciousness is the other big word in the New Age movement, and I don't have any problem with that. I kind of like it. I've said in an earlier talk that I really like a lot of the talks, the writing of David Icke. But David Icke always says, we're all part of this one consciousness, and you're an aspect of that consciousness, and I'm an aspect of that consciousness, and that's wonderful. But that's not the word. I mean, I'm a philosopher. I'm not like a New Age, thinker. Very, 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 very different. Okay. New Age is much closer to poetry in that it uses the ambiguities of language sort of to sound more profound than it is, or maybe to inspire. I shouldn't say more profound than it is. It's being inspired is profound. So if they can cause that, or sometimes they can cause a really close enough gist of something real through their sort of imprecise language, which makes that language very powerful. And I would say that about him and many other writers. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing philosophy, and I'm doing analytic philosophy. A lot of analytic philosophers would disagree with that, but it's true in the sense that I'm very specific about the meaning of my words. And I always have been. I'm not at all a New Age thinker. So I think I've covered this subject, and I hope I haven't offended anybody, but if I have, good riddance. Thank you. As I said, this is just the first of a series that I'm going to talk about on subjects pertaining to my book that seem to hold up people in their understanding of what I'm talking about, that I can identify. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Take care.